every great conflict, there are battlefields known to the world, etched into the pages of history. Yet behind the front lines, away from the thunder of artillery and the clash of steel, another war was waged. This was a war fought not by soldiers in uniform, but by ordinary citizens in kitchens, factories, and communities. It was a war of sacrifice, resilience, and unyielding determination. This is the story of the home front, where the collective will of a nation was forged, proving that the path to victory is paved not only with the courage of warriors, but with the quiet strength of those they leave behind. This is the story of the unsung heroes whose efforts turned the tide and secured the future. The rhythm of daily life was irrevocably altered, governed by the quiet discipline of rationing. Across the nation, families meticulously planned their meals around the constraints of ration books, carefully portioning out precious commodities like sugar, coffee, meat, and gasoline. The concept of abundance became a memory, replaced by a shared sense of purpose and sacrifice. Yet, where scarcity threatened, ingenuity bloomed. In backyards, schoolyards, and even public parks, the soil was turned, and seeds of defiance were sown. These victory gardens sprouted across the landscape, a vibrant testament to self-sufficiency. Each tomato, each row of beans was a small but potent blow against the enemy, a symbol of a people determined to feed themselves and sustain the fight. This nationwide effort would eventually account for nearly half of all the fresh vegetables consumed, a harvest of hope cultivated by the hands of millions. As millions of men answered the call to arms, a void opened in the nation's workforce, a gap that threatened to cripple the industrial engine of war. Into this breach stepped an army of a different kind. Millions of women left their homes and entered the humming, clattering world of the factory floor. They learned to weld, to rivet, to operate heavy machinery, their hands building the very instruments of war. The bombers that would darken enemy skies, the ships that would command the seas, and the munitions that would arm the troops. The iconic image of Rosie the Riveter, with her determined gaze and flexed bicep, was no mere propaganda. It was the living embodiment of a generation of women who shattered conventions and proved that patriotism knew no gender. Their tireless labor became the lifeblood of the Allied war machine, a relentless current of production that flowed from the heart of the nation to the farthest corners of the globe. In the face of a global threat, the nation drew together, bound by an unbreakable sense of unity and common cause. The call for resources was met with an outpouring of community spirit. Children pulled wagons laden with scrap metal, families donated old pots and pans, and mountains of rubber tires were collected in massive drives, all to be melted down and reborn as tanks, planes, and equipment for the front lines. In the evenings, the nation would fall silent, as families gathered in their living rooms, huddled around the warm glow of the radio. They listened intently to the voices of correspondents reporting from distant shores, and to the reassuring words of their leaders, sharing in the collective anxiety and hope of a country at war. The walls of towns and cities became a canvas for powerful propaganda posters, their bold graphics and stirring slogans. Do with less, so they'll have enough. We can do it. Serving as daily reminders of the stakes, reinforcing a shared resolve that every small sacrifice was a step toward a final, hard-won peace. The story of the home front is a powerful testament to the idea that victory is a collective endeavor, forged not only in the crucible of battle, but in the hearts and homes of a united people. The sacrifices made, the gardens planted, the machinery operated, all were threads in the vast tapestry of a nation mobilized for a singular purpose. It was a demonstration of a country's collective will, a quiet but profound display of strength that sustained the armies in the field and fueled the inexorable march toward victory. The legacy of these unsung heroes endures, a timeless lesson that in the darkest of hours, the most potent weapon of all is the unwavering spirit of a people standing as one. They proved that true greatness is measured not just by the battles won, but by the shared commitment to the cause, a legacy of unity that echoes through the generations. In the annals of history, few events have sculpted the modern world with such profound and devastating force as the Second World War. From the shattered landscapes of Europe to the remote islands of the Pacific, this global conflict reshaped nations, redefined warfare, and left an indelible mark on human consciousness. It was a crucible of ideology, ambition, and sacrifice, a story that began with a single aggressive spark and grew into a worldwide conflagration. The spark ignited on September 1, 1939. Driven by expansionist ambitions, German forces stormed across the Polish border, unleashing the brutal efficiency of their blitzkrieg, or lightning war. The initial invasion triggered declarations of war from Britain and France, but their response was too slow to halt the Nazi juggernaut. Across Europe, a dark tide began to spread. A meticulously animated map shows the relentless advance of the Axis powers as Denmark, Norway, the Low Countries, and France fell in rapid succession. By 1940, much of the continent was under German domination, and the world held its breath as Britain stood alone, a bastion against the seemingly unstoppable tide. This was not merely a European conflict, it was the prologue to a war that would engulf the globe. The conflict dramatically widened on December 7, 1941, when the Imperial Japanese Navy launched a surprise assault on the American naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The devastating attack pulled a shocked and enraged United States into the war, transforming it into a truly global struggle. Overnight, America's immense industrial capacity was reoriented towards the war effort. The arsenal of democracy roared to life, with factories that once produced automobiles now churning out tanks, ships, and aircraft at an astonishing rate. This mobilization of resources and manpower on an unprecedented scale would prove decisive, providing the Allied powers with the material advantage needed to confront Axis aggression on two fronts, stretching from the deserts of North Africa to the jungles of Southeast Asia. On the brutal Eastern Front, the tide began to turn. The Battle of Stalingrad, a grueling house-to-house struggle fought through the unforgiving Russian winter of 1942-43, became a symbol of attritional warfare. The eventual Soviet victory and the surrender of the German Sixth Army marked a catastrophic defeat for the Axis and the beginning of their long retreat from the East. In the West, the turning point came on June 6, 1944. Codenamed Operation Overlord, the D-Day landing saw a massive Allied armada cross the English Channel to storm the fortified beaches of Normandy. It was the largest amphibious invasion in history, a heroic and costly assault that successfully established a critical second front in Western Europe, signaling the beginning of the end for the Nazi regime. With footholds secured in both the East and West, the final chapter of the war in Europe began. The Allied forces, having broken out from Normandy, pushed relentlessly across France and towards the German border, while on the other side, the immense Soviet Red Army drove westward, liberating nations from Nazi occupation. Final desperate fighting culminated in the Battle of Berlin in the spring of 1945. Soviet troops, after a bloody and destructive siege, hoisted their flag over the ruins of the Reichstag, the symbolic seat of German power. Victory was declared in Europe. The war in the Pacific raged on. The United States and its allies engaged in a brutal island-hopping campaign, facing fanatical resistance from Japanese forces. To avoid a protracted and bloody invasion of the Japanese mainland, a decision was made to use a new, terrifying weapon. In August 1945, atomic bombs were dropped on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, unleashing unprecedented destruction and forcing the Japanese leadership to confront the reality of total annihilation. On September 2, 1945, aboard the USS Missouri anchored in Tokyo Bay, Japanese officials formally signed the Instrument of Surrender. The guns finally fell silent. The most destructive war in human history was over, leaving a world forever changed by its trials and its terrible cost. From the corridors of power where treaties were signed and broken, a storm was gathering, one that would soon engulf the entire world in darkness. In the late 1930s, the fragile peace of a generation scarred by a previous great war began to crumble under the weight of ambition and ideology. Political tensions simmered across Europe, fueled by expansionist desires and unresolved grievances. The air grew thick with ultimatums and failed diplomacy, setting the stage for an inevitable conflict. Then on September 1, 1939, the storm broke. The world watched as German forces surged across the Polish border, their advance swift and ruthless. This was not merely a border dispute, it was the spark that ignited the most devastating war in human history. The first shots fired in Poland were an overture to a global symphony of destruction, pulling nations one by one into its devastating embrace. The initial blaze in Poland quickly spread, becoming a conflagration that consumed continents. In Europe, the German war machine unleashed a new form of warfare, the Blitzkrieg, or lightning war. With terrifying speed, panzer divisions and dive bombers shattered the defenses of Denmark, Norway, the Netherlands, Belgium, and France. The continent seemed to fall under a single dark shadow. Far across the globe, in the vast expanse of the Pacific, another power was on the move. On December 7, 1941, the Empire of Japan launched a surprise attack on the American naval base at Pearl Harbor, a day that would live in infamy. This audacious strike brought the United States, a sleeping giant, into the war. The Pacific theater erupted into a brutal struggle, with American and Japanese soldiers clashing on remote islands and in sprawling naval battles, each side fighting with fierce determination for control of the seas and skies. The world was now truly at war. As the conflict raged on, its momentum began to shift, marked by colossal battles that would become legendary turning points. On the Eastern Front, the German advance met its match in the brutal Russian winter and the unyielding resolve of the Soviet people. The Battle of Stalingrad became a grueling citywide meat grinder, a desperate struggle fought in frozen ruins. Soviet soldiers, in a heroic and costly defense, managed to encircle and annihilate the German Sixth Army, while in the West, the Allies were preparing the largest amphibious invasion ever attempted. On June 6, 1944, known as D-Day, a massive force of American, British, and Canadian soldiers stormed the beaches of Normandy. Under a hail of machine gun fire, they secured a foothold in France, opening a vital second front that would squeeze the German war machine from both sides. The final act of the war was one of immense destruction and ultimate resolution. Pushed back from east and west, the Third Reich began to collapse. In the spring of 1945, Soviet forces fought their way into the heart of the German capital, and the fall of Berlin signaled the end of the war in Europe. Yet the fight continued in the Pacific, where resistance remained fierce. In a decision that would forever alter the course of history and warfare, the United States deployed a new, terrifying weapon. In August 1945, atomic bombs were dropped on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, unleashing unprecedented devastation and forcing Japan's surrender. The formal ceremonies marked the official end of the global conflict. From the smoldering ruins and the ashes of millions of lives, a new world began to emerge. The silence of peace was profound, a stark contrast to the cacophony of war, and nations began the monumental task of rebuilding, determined to forge a future free from such a catastrophic shadow.